All right, Adrian, I look forward to talking with you and sharing your story with everyone here. I want to start by just learning your personal story and your path to pursuing music, because I think it's so cool that a certain episode of Sesame Street kind of gave you an aha moment when you were watching it. So I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Sure, absolutely. So it's an honor to be here and to really think about the disability identity, which is similar to something that we all experience in our lives. We are sometimes disabled, sometimes currently disabled, sometimes we will, or inevitably will become disabled as well. So I think that a lot of the times our individual stories, also spoken through our origins and music, really apply to all of us in what it not only means to be human, but also what it means to live a fulfilled, intentional life. So I was born without a right hand, as people can see. So I have a visible disability, but there are plenty of invisible ones that are out there as well. And I remember my mom telling me this story when I was first born. I think that in certain cultures, like the Chinese superstitious and sort of folk culture, disability can be seen as a curse within a family. And my mom was very worried to present me to my grandparents, specifically my grandmother, for the first time. So I went to Hong Kong, where she was from, and my grandmother, we call her a pawpaw, looked at me and said, well, there's nothing wrong with this baby, Adrian. He laughs like any baby, cries like any baby. He needs a little bit of exercise. So she went to the marketplace and found a bracelet for me, a silver bracelet, a small one, that had silver bells attached to it. And when I was wiggling around in the crib, if I had that bracelet on my small hand, as I call it, it would go jingle, 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 jingle. And I could do that for hours because I was just fascinated by sound. And I think my grandmother at that point looked at my mom smugly almost and said, well, you see, he's working on his biceps already. And I feel like even just that instance of the intersection of music and sound. I started off as a percussionist, I'd like to say, and then sort of worked my way to the violin. But I was in 5th grade at my elementary school, and our teacher all wanted us to play the recorder because it's accessible, cheap to produce, and I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to play all of the notes on the instrument. So my parents started looking for different options. The first one was the trumpet, because that was very practical. And I just didn't identify with the sound too much. And singing obviously would have been an option, but I remember my teacher, 5th grade teacher at that time, said, well, maybe you can be the class composer, and then you can be the audience, and you can clap as we have these recorder quintets composed for the class. And I think that my parents didn't think that was a great idea, so it was around that time that I was watching a little bit of Sesame Street and came upon a clip featuring a violinist and a young girl. And it was all set up on the stage where the girl with the very small violin was running up the stage, and it was super easy for her. And then there's this man who came in crutches and had his violin up on stage already. He's just struggling to get up the stairs. And he said to the little girl as he got up to the stage, you know, some things are really easy for you that are hard for me. And then he plays the violin brilliantly, I might add. And then she says, well, some things that are easy for you are hard for me. And then she plays like a very simple violin tune. And I was just mesmerized, not only seeing that representation on stage of someone with visible disability, but just the instrument was just my style. It's like fast and brilliant, and it just had so much passion imbibed within it. And I realized after a while, after starting the violin, that that man was Ishak Perlman, one of the great violinists of our generation. I think I saw his picture out outside the concert hall as well. And just thinking about the contextual nature of disability was something that I was maybe implicitly aware of when I was a child, where there are two definitions of disability. One can be a very medical diagnosis, like you have an amputation, you have cerebral palsy, you have polio, as Ishak Perlman had. And the other one is socially constructed. And those disabilities are very much based upon our environments, like inaccessible stairs, for instance. It could be inaccessible materials, like my lack of being able to play the recorder, for instance. And I think more than anything else, it's the lack of attitudes that really lower the ceiling of potential development for any child. So I was very grateful to see that on TV, and I was very lucky to sort of get going on this journey.
And then Itzhak Perlman would end up being your teacher.
Well, amongst many other wonderful teachers, in fact, one of my teachers, Peter Unjin, is going to be conducting here tonight, for instance. Ishak Perlman I worked with during the summer times at his festival on Shelter Island, and it was definitely an incredible, how can I say, roundabout moment to see. I think, well, I started at 10, and then I was probably around 15, 16 when I started playing for him. And just the most generous soul, and definitely one who I've used as a model as what does it mean to be a disability advocate. I think a lot of the times we think about influencing or speaking out about legislation, being aware of the policies that are created on like a large social scale, or sometimes on a small scale, like concert halls and how accessible they are. Do you have concerts that have interpreters, for instance? Do you have concerts that are specifically geared towards sensory sensitive individuals who are on the autism spectrum, from young children to grown-ups alike? And I also think that for both of us, one of the greatest tools of advocacy, and I feel very privileged in this scope, is just being able to play music and to share art in a way. But I also want to stress that there is like something in disability culture that thinks that exceptionalism should be the norm, in a sense that we look towards folks who have disabilities, who have risen beyond their circumstances and are an inspiration. But we really do have to continue to shift culture in thinking about the extraordinary in every single individual who is facing some type of challenge, because in the end, we're just, as I was saying earlier, just supporting ourselves.
It sounds like you had an incredible support group growing up, and a lot of encouragement, lots of teachers and advocates. Were there people along the way who sort of dismissed the idea of you saying, I want to pursue music professionally when I get older, when I grow up, I want to be a musician professionally? Were there people who kind of dismissed that? And then who were also the people, aside from your family and close friends, who were encouraging to you? Sure.
So I think that in my case, I was very fortunate, again, and privileged to have a certain degree of talent on the instrument. The adaptation that I have here, by the way, is sort of very simple but perfect in every way, for me at least. It's called a spatula, and this was actually made at a rehabilitation hospital up in Toronto, where I'm from. It's just a piece of plaster that I have two, pieces of Velcro, and then a tongue that used to be like the end of a rubber shoe, and then like this welded piece of aluminum that bridges the bow over and attaches. And I was very fortunate that like through that I was able to basically express anything that I wanted. I think that the process of arts education, or just learning for all of us, is really just trying to find a discipline in which we can explain ourselves and others. And then form communities around sharing those stories so that we come to a common understanding of our shared humanity. And I was very fortunate that I just had those privileges very early on. I think there were certain degrees of like things that I had to adapt, like for instance, pizzicato. I couldn't use my right hand, and there was like a string quartet I was playing in grad school by Maurice Ravel, and there's a movement that is all pizzicato. And I remember, like, I loved the first two movements. I was like, uh-oh, how are we gonna figure this one out? And I think that I was just very fortunate that I had like quartet members who were like, okay, well, you know, the cellist isn't doing anything. They can play in treble clef, and they were like playing all the way down there, and I was just resting, and and then I would do as much as I could, and then like if there were like double, triple stops, you could probably place them in the viola. So I had a lot of support and arranging on that end. I think that from a teacher perspective, again, it was not necessarily about the bow technique, and it was about what are you trying to express, and then how do you sort of use whatever you can physically to sort of realize that imagination. And I think that's sort of where we all want to be when we think about accessibility, whether it be a space or whether it be tools. You want to be able to get this sense of being able to use that as the foundation for exploring the larger world.
I'm glad you brought up educators, because you are a teacher as well. So talk a little bit about the importance of being a supportive educator and why that's such a rewarding job for you, and just the benefits of it, and why you get up every day to do it.
Sure, yeah. So I run a program in Boston. It's an after-school program that helps students with disabilities and their typical peers to be able to be in ensemble together. So after a certain point, like after grad school as a performer, I was sort of like trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I was playing some concertos here and there and recitals, and orchestra was perhaps an option, but I just had the sense that there was more that I could make an impact in the field using my unique background and experiences. So about a year after graduating, I was starting to perform a little bit more. I decided to go back to school and study education, which is where I'm at right now in Boston. And I studied in particular just in a very micro way how inclusion works, because just like performance, there's so much that goes on behind the stage if you see a successful classroom go on. And you know, if you hear the orchestra tonight, it seems cohesive, and it's like, wow, that just comes out of nothing. But you imagine every single member of this orchestra practicing their own parts. You have the conductor coming in, you have the stagehands who are putting the entire space together to make this place beautiful. And it's the same in a classroom too. Like we think about curriculum that like leverages brain-based research. We think about like universal design in curriculum that is aimed towards really attending to what we call the margins. I like to say that there are no average kids out there, and yet we teach the average all the time. If we can find ways that we can help and support our students who are really flying and taking off and need enrichment in some forms, and then folks who have disabilities, you sort of encompass everyone in the middle. So I was really fascinated by that question. What does inclusion, accessibility look in every single aspect, the research perspective, a policy advocacy perspective, from a practice perspective, and really trying to put all these jigsaw pieces together so that when a child comes in, like for instance with the music inclusion program with cerebral palsy, and they're like in first grade, they don't feel anything different than any other child who's in that classroom. It's not, as I said, like this idea of like tying in like being exceptional and being disabled. It's really just something that should be completely normalized, and everyone has an equal pathway towards excellence.
We're just starting National Disability Employment Awareness Month. The theme this year is Advancing Access and Equity. Why is this a month that deserves attention, and what does it mean to you on a personal level?
I think that a lot of the times we will see people in the workplace or our colleagues, and we are very quick to jump upon what are your stories. And I think that this sense of awareness really comes from not thinking as anyone as you are, an answer to my own biases, but a starting point to ask more questions. Because whenever you think about the disability identity, when you think about socioeconomic and racial identity, there are no monoliths ever. And I think about like music when I'm playing Beethoven after this, and like every single time that you come across these notes, there is a spirit of inquiry that makes something come alive in a way that I think our workplaces can come alive as well. To think that we can leverage the strengths and identities of a diverse workforce in a way that is not a charity case, but one that is integral to our evolution and growth, whether it be a company, whether it be an arts institution, nonprofit, whether it be classical music and this art form. Like we think about the idea of Beethoven, for instance, encompassing, this like, oh, he's played so often, and why is he wonderful and great? Like he had a perspective upon life that, yes, was compelling and he was a genius, but thinking about how he was able to use his art form in a way to be able to express something inherently unique sort of speaks to this idea that we need to continue finding avenues of positive disruption in whatever we do, and the first thing that we need to do is, be in a place where everything from a policy perspective, from our hiring policies, for instance, to how we retain diverse employees, really feeds in to something that benefits all of us rather than compliance.
You have received countless awards, so many awards. You have played with major orchestras around the world. You've played at the White House. I know it's probably hard to narrow down some of the highlights of your career, but what are maybe 2 or 3 that will always stand out to you?
Well, I think that it's interesting, like what is interesting in like a bio, like for instance, playing for the Pope or playing at the Olympics feel big and really, wow, that's incredible. I think it's really the smallest interactions that I really find compelling and really drive meaning. Like I remember I was in the Middle East about 3 years ago, and I came across, I was playing a rehabilitation hospital for refugees, and there was one girl who was missing both of her arms due to the violence in that area. And I was playing meditation from Massenet's Thais, and she was drawing with her feet. Like she was drawing flowers and like a house, and it was just such like the most beautiful drawing I had seen. And then at the end of the concert, I laid my violin on a chair, and she decided to just like start plucking it with her toes, and she was just so happy to like try something like that. And over the next 6 months, we stayed in touch. We connected to our music teacher, and she is now playing the cello with her feet. You should see this. Where like it's on a box, and like the cello's a little bit larger, but her toes are just as dexterous as our fingers, because that's what she uses all the time. So she's able to like use this and then like hold the bow with an adaptation. And who's to say that she is no more of a cellist than anyone else? But when you see someone like that flourish and have an identity, she doesn't consider herself as a victim or someone who's had trauma. It's just, I'm a cellist. That's what she says.
Just a sidebar, a friend of mine in college also had no arms, and he worked at the radio station. He had a special chair, and he could run the entire board, like live remotes, everything, using his feet. All the buttons, everything was incredible. Tell me about the work you're doing to help create adaptive instruments in classical performance.
Sure. So, well, I've talked about a few adaptations. Like, sometimes it's an adaptation of the instrument itself. So, for instance, this is a physical one where I'm able to move the bow back and forth. Moving a cello to the ground and creating a holder is another one for a string instrument. And then there are some children who have more, how can I say, challenging and more just all-encompassing disabilities where they won't be able to move any limb, for instance, aside from like maybe their neck. And so we've done a lot of work around like eye gaze technology for those who are paralyzed, for instance, and in translating those type of very subtle but intentional movements into sound. So there's an incredible connection right now between music performance and music therapy. If you go to any great hospital out there, there's just so many tools that are out there to think about music as a healing tool. And we definitely feel that viscerally when we go to a great concert, for instance. We feel transformed. Maybe we're just not feeling great, but there are literal physical, social, emotional benefits with engaging with music that are research-backed. There are students who will train muscles to hit notes on a virtual environment, for instance, and they can do that far more sustainably if they can attach that to musical notes rather than like, oh, this is an exercise you have to repeat 10 times.
Well, in more recent years, there has been more work done to prioritize DE and I as it pertains to disabilities. Do we still have a long way to go?
I think that we definitely have come far in terms of trying to recognize as many stories as possible. I think that it's such an all-encompassing field when we think about advocacy for disability, and to understand that a lot of these identities are intersectional as well. That when you are fighting on behalf of those with disabilities, you're also fighting against racial injustice, for instance. You're thinking about, for instance, like socioeconomic status. Can families afford to put their children through specialized programs if they need specific types of supports? And I think that there's definitely a lot in the policy realm that have to continue, and definitely a lot within our field to be able to, as we're doing right now, just simply listening and seeing representation from the field. Because I know I am not the all-encompassing disability person in the end, yet I think a lot of folks feel like they have to speak on behalf of an entire subsection of the human population. Hopefully, as you continue these conversations, you'll see nuance, you'll see difference, and ways that we can not only celebrate but really fight and advocate for justice.
What was the first major work you performed?
First major work?
Right.
Oh, that's hard to say. I think, well, one of the first concerto that I played with the orchestra was the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto with the Toronto Symphony. Peter Ungen was conducting, and I was so nervous. I remember there was like a big bunch of bananas, and I heard that like in this dressing room, and bananas were supposed to like keep you from being nervous because they have beta blockers. So I was like, I don't know, 18 at the time, 17, 18. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna have like 2 bunches of bananas. And I remember the first time I played that night, I was just like so tired and almost sick to my stomach. I was just
You haven't eaten a banana since.
Yes, potassium overload. Oh my goodness. I remember that was wonderful though. It was an incredible experience to be able to have a dream realized and to continue along that journey. There's so much more to play.
What advice do you have for people who are, dealing with disabilities who want to pursue music?
I think that it's really just knowing to ask for assistance and support when needed. It's really difficult, though, to put that onus on a young child to say, like, these are my needs in the end, and yet some type of structured conversation has to happen amongst adults and specialists to be able to realize the full imagination of the child that's in front of you. I think that it's really, like we say in music, it's all about listening in the end, and it's like okay that like things can change. Like for instance, there are parts in this sonata that I'm playing, switching bowings up, like, oh, Beethoven didn't write like 5 slurs in something that has 1 slur, for instance, but because I can't use as much bow, I just try my best. Or I'll have to drop some of the pizzicato, for instance, and to say that's completely okay, that you are here not to be perfect, you are here to express yourself and know that that expression of self is what the world needs.
What's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
I would say in music, the most important limbs that you have are not your hands, but your ears. Or appendages, I should say, because it's always a constant, it's an art form that is the connection of physicality to how you perceive sound. And even then, we have percussionists like Evelyn Glennie, who are deaf, for instance, and still play using the vibrations from the concert hall. So not even then, like, so even whatever I had with that early piece of advice, while it was helpful, it's probably not true as well. And the sky's the limit.
Well, we are pretty much close to time because you are going to perform for us. So
Yes.
Tell me what we're going to hear.
Yes, we're going to listen to some of Beethoven Spring Sonata. This is his 5th sonata for piano and violin. This was probably in a relatively more bucolic time in his life. It was really around like his later violin sonatas that he was confronting disability and challenge. But at the same time, I thought it was a fitting composer to be able to bring here and to sort of just, again, speak to this idea that disability culture is, again, not like something to be pitied, but definitely one that is integral to our growth and evolution as a society.
And if someone wants to reach out to you, either after this or this week or later on, how can they reach you?
Yeah, I have some social media handles on Instagram, for instance. You could probably just look up my name, and of course, I'm performing from time to time, so hopefully
you're
we'll see
around.
you there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, I am going to let you perform.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Let's give a warm Dallas thank you to Adrian.